Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be going through the vSRX and Gns3 Part 1 Learning Byte. Alright, so in the topology we have a few different devices. We have vSRX1, which is the vSRX that we'll be using with Gns3. And then we have user1 that uses that IP address and connects in on the user zone. And then we have server 1, which uses that IP address and connects in on the server's zone. And then vSRX1 connects to the internet on the untrust zone. And so with this learning byte, what are we doing? Well, we are going to be focusing on setting up Gns3 to use vSRX. And we'll do a few different things, but the major highlights are we're going to deploy the Gns3 Vm with using the free VM player, and then we'll configure the Gns3 VM with the proper resources so we can start up a vSRX device. And then we'll use the vSRX Gns3 appliance template, and what we'll do is we'll download that from the Gns3 website, and then we'll use the vSRX QCOW2 image with that template. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here is Gns3, and here is VMware Player. And Gns3 is starting up and it's connecting to the local server that I have on this laptop. And it wants us to create a new project. We'll call this vSRX Gns3 LB. We'll create that project. And if we go to our devices, we see in routers there's nothing. We got some switches. We got some in devices. Nothing in security devices. And this is where vSRX is going to show up once we put it in here. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to get the Gns3 VM going. Because what happens is we're going to be able to deploy vSRX inside the Gns3 VM, which will be running in VM Player. And so that means that the Gns3 VM will be running KVM. And we'll launch the vSRX QCOW2 image, which is for KVM, inside that Gns3 VM, which is in VM Player. So we're going to be doing some nested deployment with the vSRX VM. So keep that in mind. And since this is a lab scenario that you'll just be using for testing, it's not going to matter with performance. Now, where you will see a problem is with boot up times, and that can take anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, depending on your system resources. So if we go to Edit Preferences on Gns3, and then we go to Gns3 VM, we'll see here that there's nothing we can select. And that's because we haven't actually fired up the VM yet. We can go to the Gns3 website, select this link here that'll take you right to the website where you can download it. Let's go ahead and click that. And my browser opened up on my other monitor, but you can see here we can download a zip file that contains that. And I've already done that, so I'm not going to download that again. So let's go ahead and cancel that and then go back to VM Player. And once you've downloaded that zip file and extracted the OVA file, you want to select the Open a Virtual Machine option in VMware Player. So let's select that option. And then we want to select the Gns3 VM.ova file. That would be in that zip file. And import it. And that'll take just a minute to import. All right, so it is imported and it is powered off. You don't want to power it on here or edit the virtual machine settings at this point. You may think to yourself, well, I know vSRX needs at least 4 gigabytes of RAM. It's set to 2 gigabytes of RAM. And so, okay, I'll go ahead and edit the VM settings and change that, right? No, you don't want to do that because Gns3 will configure the VM for you. And if you change it here, then Gns3 will change it back and you'll be completely confused. And not to mention it has one CPU as well, and you need more than one CPU for vSRX. So let's go ahead and click cancel there. And you want to close this because Gns3 will start at VM Player and then try to start the virtual machine. And if you have this open, you're going to run into some ownership problems by doing that. So let's go ahead and close VM Player. And then we go to Edit, Preferences, Gns3 VM. We can see that, okay, we have it enabled. That looks good. And I already have it configured. The default is actually 1 and I think it's 2 gigs. And I already had that configured from before, so you want to set that higher. You need at least 2, but this laptop I'm using has 4 cores, so let's go ahead and do that. And then you might think to yourself, well, let's go ahead and set it to 4 gigs, right? And no, the actual VM will need some RAM itself. And if you fire up anything else that uses the VM, it'll need more as well. So you want to set that at a gig higher of what you actually really need. because the host VM is going to use a gig itself. And so if we set that at 5 gigs, we'll be okay. So we'll click apply, click OK there. Then let's go ahead and close Gns3 and reopen it. And it's open and connecting to the local host for the server. And let's go ahead and cancel that, and we'll open up our project that we created just a few minutes ago. And what it's doing right now is I'm going to pull up the VMware player that Gns3 launched. It's starting that Gns3 VM right now. So we'll have to wait for that to start. And you'll see here in Gns3, you'll want this Gns3 VM is starting. You'll see it turn green over here. So it'll give you a little status update on what it's doing, and we want to see this turn green before we can actually use it. And so what I'll do here is this will take a minute or so. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll start it back up after the VM is done booting. And you'll be able to see here on the left. And actually that booted up really quick. So forgot how quickly that did boot up. And so great, it turned green as well over here. So we can see it's running. We can see the usage as well. And things look good. So didn't need to pause the video. That actually starts up really quick. And so, okay, great. So what do we need to do next? What we need to do is we need to open a web browser. And I've got one right here. We're going to go to the Gns3 website, and then we need to go to the marketplace. Up top, you'll see the links, and let's go to marketplace and then appliances. And it should be under the most popular section, pretty close to the top. I'm just going to do, oh, there it is. I was going to do a quick search on the page, but no need to do that. It's right here, Juniper vSRX. And you can see it was last updated March 21st, 2020. So that was yesterday for me. So this gets updated pretty frequently. So we can select that, and you can see some information here. You can see required RAM is set to 4 gigs. And remember, we needed to set the Gns3 VM to 5 gigs. And then it gives you some links to where you can go download the files. And notice how it's the QCOW2 files. We talked about that. And so you can use those links. You'll need to sign in to do that. And this is for vSRX2. This is for vSRX3. I highly recommend you use vSRX3. It'll run a lot better, especially since we're doing nested. vSRX2 already does this kind of weird nesting thing. So you'll be doing double nesting if you use vSRX2. So use vSRX3. So you want to use this link down here with the QCOW2 file. And so just click download, and we just save that file. And one thing to keep in mind here is when you download this, you can leave this in the downloads folder. Gns3 will look in there for that image file. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we downloaded that. Let's go ahead and go back to Gns3, and then we'll go to File, Import Appliance, and then we'll import that Gns3 appliance. And the only option we can select here is to install the appliance on Gns3 VM. We talked about that earlier, why we need to do that, because the nested nature, and it uses KVM with that. And so it's scanning directories for files. And this scans the downloads directory and also the Gns3 directory. And anything that pops up is ready to install. These are the different versions it supports. So great, we have the 20.4 R1, vSRX 3.0. So you just go ahead and select that, click next, and it asks us if we want to actually install this. Yes, we do. And then it goes ahead and uploads the QCOW2 file to Gns3. So it's going to take a little bit of time to do that. And you can see here in the template, it's giving some information. It says here it'll be available in the firewall category, and that was the case with older versions of Gns3. However, it's in the security category now. They've changed that. The template obviously hasn't been updated for the vSRX appliance with that information, but just keep that in mind. And then we have the information of initial username is root with no password. That's important to know because when we fire that up, we'll want to be able to log in to be able to configure this thing, and we need to know what we need to log in with, right? So, and that's just vSRX in general. And so, yeah, we're almost done here. And look at that. It's done. Well, it's almost done. Just goes finishing up some tasks. All right, so you can see up top here, it's been successfully uploaded. That's great. Let's click finish. And it lets us know that it created the template. And that's going to be under security devices. Here we can see it under security devices. And now we're ready to use this in a Gns3 topology. All right, so here is our topology. Let's go over our devices real quick. In here we have vSRX1, and that connects to the user's zone. And we have user 1 at the 10.10.201.100 IP address. and then it connects to server 1 in the servers zone, and server 1 has an IP address of 10.10.202.100, and then vSRX1 connects into the internet on the untrust zone. And the criteria on the right, we see that Gns3 is set up to use vSRX1. We did that in the previous Learning Byte that is a part of this Learning Byte series. And so what we need to do is we need to connect interfaces, we need to configure vSRX1, and then we'll test communication. And so with that, let's go ahead and jump to Gns3 and get this going. All right, so here is Gns3, and you can see here we have vSRX 20.4 R1 3.0 already added. We did that with the last Learning Byte we did. That is a part of this Learning Byte series. And then we have the Gns3 Vm running in VMware Player. And again, that was done in the last Learning Byte of this Learning Byte series. And so let's go ahead and start doing this. Let's move vSRX out to the middle, and we can rename that. Call it vSRX-1. And then let's add some end hosts. We'll add one. We'll add a second one. Let's name these. We'll call this user 1. Call this server 1. And then we need to add an internet cloud. And we'll just rename this to call this internet. And then let's click on the connections button and start connecting these. We have Ethernet 0 on user 1. Let's connect it to vSRX1. Now we have a list of interfaces. We have FXP0, which we know as the management interface. We don't want to connect it to that. We want to be able to route this traffic. So let's go ahead and connect it to Gigi000. And then same thing with server 1. We'll connect that to Gigi001. And then we'll connect Gigi002 to the internet. Now notice we have two different interfaces here. So you might be unsure of which interface to connect to. In this scenario, we want to connect it to Ethernet 3. I don't know what happened to Ethernet 1, 2, or whatever, but we have Ethernet and Ethernet 3. And so we want to connect it to Ethernet 3, and I'll show you the reason behind that. So remember that there was two interfaces here on the internet cloud. And that is actually the interfaces on the Gns3 Vm. And so we jump back to the Gns3 Vm, and we look at the settings of this VM. We can see here we have two network adapters. Network adapter and then network adapter 2. The first network adapter is set to a host-only network, which is a private network. We don't want to use that. That is used to route traffic for anything internally in our topology. The second adapter you see here is set to NAT. Now that is that Ethernet 3 adapter, and that will allow us to get out of our local topology and reach hosts on the local network or hosts on the internet. And it will also allow us to go into our topology from our local machine here. And that'll allow us to use something like SSH and manage it through SSH, manage the vSRX1 device through SSH instead of using the console to manage the vSRX1 device or any other devices in our topology for that matter. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and cancel that and go back to Gns3. And the first thing we want to do is we want to start vSRX1. And so we just right click, select start there. You saw that I did that earlier. And we have a whole bunch of different options. And one thing I want to point out is now that we've started it, it's booting, right? And it takes some time to boot. And so we'll go into the console, select the console option, and that'll pop up the console. And the thing I want to point out as we're doing this is that this is going to take a little bit of time. In the last Learning Byte, I talked about how this is a nested VM environment. The Gns3 Vm is a VM we're running in VM Player. And then we're deploying the vSRX QCOW2 file in KVM in the Gns3 VM. And so we're having a nested VM scenario. And that means it's going to take a little bit longer to boot. And it will take anywhere between 15 minutes to an hour to boot this vSRX device. And so this is a great time if you're doing this to go take a break, go walk the dog, do something else. It will take some time to boot. And so, but once it's booted, it runs fast, commits fast, there's no problem. So it's just the long wait time when booting. So with that being said, I'm going to pause this video right now and start it back up once the vSRX1 has booted. All right, so the vSRX device has booted. Let's go ahead and log in. Just root, no password. And the first thing we want to check is to make sure that the FPC is up and running, that we can see the PIC. And we don't see anything yet. Just show slot 0 present. That's not what we want to see, but that just means it's still booting. We can just look at the FPC. We see nothing's there. And we can see some other messages showing up. It's just still going, even though we can log in. We can't actually do much with that yet. And if we do show interface terst gigi, there'll be nothing. And because there's no FPC that is online. It shows FPC 0 present, but it doesn't show anything online. And we could do the show chassis hardware command. And you can see here that it shows an FPC. And yeah, you know, that's fine. We just got to wait a little longer for it to finish completely booting. So I'm going to pause this video again. And then once it's finished completely booting, I'll start it back up. All right, it's been about 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and check that again. And much better. Slot 0 shows online for FPC. And then PIC 0 shows online as well. And we see vSRX DP, DK, GE for that. And we look at chassis hardware. You can see FPC 0 and PIC 0 underneath that. That looks good. And we just look at the FPC. We can see that it's online. Things look good there. So if we do show interface gigi star terse, we can see we have gigi 0 through 2 up. And those are the interfaces we've connected. So perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. And so let's start configuring vSRX1. Set the host name to vSRX-1. Set root authentication. And we'll need to set the services SSH root login allow. That way we can log in with root with using SSH. And then we'll need to configure interfaces. And first I want to delete what we have for interfaces, delete what we have for security. We'll be configuring that separately. And so let's go ahead and go into interfaces and set gigi 000.0 family inet. And we're going to set the address that puts us in the same subnet as user 1. And then same subnet as server 1. Then we want to set gigi 2 with an IP address that is going to be on the same network as our local network that our device is running on. This will allow us to be able to communicate with hosts on the local network and hosts on the internet and things like that. And then let's configure the security zones. Set the interface for that the user security zone. And then for the servers, the gigi 001. And we'll set some host inbound traffic so we can communicate with the interface directly. And then the security zone on trust interface is gigi 002. And here we would want to at least set system services SSH. We could say any services. This is just a lab, but I'm just going to do SSH because we will be coming in on this device using SSH. Everything looks good there. And for sake of time, I'm just going to set the default policy to permit all. Let's go ahead and commit that, and we should be done configuring vSRX1. And that's committed, so let's go back to Gns3 topology. And we do need to start user 1 and server 1. And then we go to the console for user 1 and we'll configure it. So here is user 1. We'll configure the IP. /24, then specify the gateway. Then we'll specify a DNS server as well. And then let's go ahead and do the same for server 1. So here is server 1. We'll set the IP. and subnet mask, and then the gateway. And then we'll set the DNS. And we should be good there. So let's go ahead and let's jump back to user 1. And oh, there's one other quick thing. I forgot to configure NAT on SRX 1. So let's do that real quick. We'll configure the rule. Configure any source address. And configure source native interface. And that'll allow these user 1 and server 1 to be natted when going out towards the internet or anything on the local network. Okay, so let's go ahead and attempt to ping. Let's say Google. If I could type. And I did forget one other thing on vSRX 1. We need to configure the default route. This should help. All right, so let's go back to user 1. Let's try that again. Much better, much better. So we can reach stuff on the internet. Perfect. Now, can we ping server 1? All right, and let's try that again. It might have just been something like an ARP resolution issue. And great, it's working now. So the ARP just had to resolve. Things are looking good. Let's go ahead and attempt to open an SSH session to vSRX 1, now that we've set that up correctly. And one thing I do want to point out is that the console session is also available using the information seen on the right here. You can open a telnet session to 192.168.178.128 with port 5000 to get to vSRX 1, and also console sessions to these other devices if you want to use, say, Secure CRT or something. So let's go ahead and pull up Secure CRT and attempt to connect with SSH to vSRX 1. So go ahead and grab a Secure CRT window and start a new connection. And that was 10.10.1.50. Username of root. And we could configure a separate username instead of root. But yeah, things work great. We're able to log in as root. And we could configure it using Secure CRT with SSH from our local machine. So that does bring us to the end of this Learning Bytes series. And in this Learning Bytes series, we demonstrated how to set up and configure vSRX with Gns3. So as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.